Welcome everyone, my name is John Brown. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and I welcome you to this Design Matters lecture. And I appreciate you coming out on a nice February evening. I want to begin by acknowledging the land on which we're meeting today and the land on which all of us live, work, and play. It's significant every time that we have a meeting here that we recognize that we're probably 200 meters away from the crossing of the Bow River and the Elbow River, which is the traditional meeting place of the indigenous peoples that have stewarded this land for many centuries. And as designers, landscape architects, planners, and architects, I think we need to also recognize and acknowledge the extraordinary job of stewardship of the land that the indigenous peoples were able to accomplish. And the corollary of that, I suppose, is how quickly the colonial culture was able to mess it all up and get us into the predicament that we're in right now. Specifically, I want to acknowledge the people of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and also recognize that Calgary is home to Métis Nation Region 3. I want to start by thanking our volunteers and for Megan for doing such a great job putting all of this together, and for the staff that have brought the food and the beverages, refreshments. It's always nice every time we do this. Since COVID, we get more and more people coming back. I think it's something that we all missed, not being able to be together and talk about design in the city and things that matter, but rather than just doing it on Zoom. Our Design Matters, next Design Matters is on March the 13th. It's during our architecture, planning, and landscape architecture block weeks. We have a double header, which is exciting. We have Shane Williamson, the principal of Williamson out of Toronto, and Valerio Morabito, the Enel Foundation Italian Fellow in Architecture, Urban Design, and Landscape Architecture. They will be speaking on, is it Monday night? Yes, Monday night, March the 13th. And then on Friday, we're going to be having a student work showcase. So on the Friday, we're going to be having a party here to celebrate the work of all of our students who will have been taking a block week over that course. At that time, we're also going to be opening the exhibit of the Markham Architectural Collaborative, MBAC. I think that's how it stands for. As most of you probably know, Mark is retiring from the school at the end of this term, and this exhibit is a way of us paying tribute to his enormous contribution to this school and to the city over the course of a number of decades. I'm still trying to get my head around what it's going to be like to not have him here, but we want to say thank you. We want to recognize the amazing work that he and his office, which largely consists of our graduates, have done in transforming the city and the city of Calgary and other places. So it's going to be a big celebration over the course of the week of the 13th of March, and I very much hope that you're going to be able to join us. So now to the main event. It's my pleasure to introduce this evening's speakers, Stephan Chevalier and Sergio Morales of Chevalier Morales Architects, which is a leading Canadian architecture firm based in Montreal. Established in 2005 by the principals, Stephan and Sergio, the firm is committed to contemporary architecture that is sensitive to the spirit of place, from the qualities of light and materials to the needs of local communities and environments. The firm is best known for its cultural interventions and library designs, from the Drummondville Public Library to Pierre Fon's Public Library in Montreal, the Saul Bellow Library in Lachine, the House of Literature and the Heritage Site of Old Quebec, and the future Saskatoon New Central Library in Saskatchewan. Chevalier Morales has been the recipient of numerous awards, notably 2 Governor General Medals in Architecture, several awards of excellence from the Quebec Order of Architects and the 2018 Emerging Architecture Practice Award from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. The firm was founded in the wake of Stephan and Sergio's working for more than a decade on large public complex projects across Canada, including the Grande Bibliothèque de Québec, Quebec's now Grand Library. And this experience allowed them to launch Chevalier and Morales in Montreal to grow rapidly and to earn the trust of important clients from the City of Montreal to McGill University, independent theaters, and cultural centers. Please join me in welcoming Stephan and Sergio to the meeting.
We're good to go? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us tonight. Thank you very much to Dean Brown, the School of Architecture, for the invitation. We feel very privileged to be here, and we'll try to present tonight our approach. So we're going to present a fair amount of projects. There's quite a few slides, so be patient. We'll try to go through them fairly quickly. And we'll try to explain our thought process and how we actually start designing our projects. Thanks for the great introduction. Just to give you an idea of who we are, Stephan Chevalier, Sergio Morales. We started the firm in 2005 after working or having the chance of working for great firms. Sergio worked for Société Perrot for many, many years. He had the chance to be in Vancouver working for the Busby at the time, now Perkins and Will, and also for the Patcows. And when we started the firm, one of our first questions was, what are we going to do? How are we going to design our own language and approach? And so that was quite a question for us. We didn't want to redesign or redo things that we did in the past. And to be quite frank, we were very, very lucky to be part of a very specific moment in Quebec where the competition process just started. And through the competitions, we actually, so far, we've been involved in maybe more than 20 competitions over the years. And that became our place for research and try to define what kind of architecture we wanted to do. So we've been very lucky to be able to be at a very specific moment in our early career to try to find our place into the, of course, Canadian landscape or Quebec landscape at first, and then now into the Canadian landscape of architecture. So should we start? Super.
I think what we'd like to propose today, it's interesting that Dean Brown said that we won Emerging Firm in 2018 after having worked for 12 to 13 years. But it's also an interesting date and an interesting time for us because in January 2018, there was a big and important exhibition about our work at the University of Montreal. And so we proposed to start from that exhibition and move through those 4 or 5 years of work until the very last exhibition project that we work on, which is the proposal that we did for the Venice Biennale of 2023. This 2018 exhibition was really an occasion for us to look back at what we've done, at our work, at our design process, and how we saw the ground or the territory of our projects as an empty space, an empty land that we filled with fictions and narratives, and how this territory moved from being unoccupied to preoccupied. So I think that's the journey we're proposing to you guys.
So So like Sergio said, the exhibit was about our early work, and we called it références croisées, which is of course cross-references. We ended up looking at our stuff that we've been producing for quite a few years and trying to find a link in our approach. Like I said, we were looking for our own language, trying to find how we start designing a project, and you know, of course, at university we're sometimes looking at Instagram and pictures and all of that information, but we were looking for our own roots to be able to define what we were doing. So looking at all that stuff, it came clear to us that context was very, very important. Of course, urban context, historical context, but we kind of find the idea of going further into that idea of contextual approach, including social content, and trying to find more information about designing whatever, a building, a site, a small house, or a library, or any larger project. So looking at all that work, site was becoming important, but the neighborhood, the social context, politics, and we're starting to dig deeper and deeper into that kind of information we wanted to actually start looking at in every project. So when we start a project, it's very, very large. We're looking at the program, but first of all, we're going to be looking at everything, like reading newspapers or going on site or interviewing people or looking at the program. It's a very large spectrum of information that we're trying to gather at the same time. So that exhibit was actually a way of showing that, and also interacting with people and having people letting us know what they see into our work. We're still doing many models. We're producing sketches, studies. We've got tons of it, still have tons of it, but the idea was actually able to exhibit it and try to find the link or how we're going to thread the information in between every project, even if it's a small project or a larger one. So it was quite interesting for us to kind of showcase that, but look at it and have other people look at what we were actually producing at the time. There's quite a few images of that. So it's roughly 2,000 square feet of information that we had produced over a fair amount of time through different kind of model, finished model, but also production model as we go.
I think one of the things we invented working on that exhibition with the School of Architecture is this idea of constructing what we call the memorabilia, which is essentially a big black white box, and in which we put all kinds of things, papers from site meetings, fragments from the project, samples, and then we're starting to build that spatial memory of our projects, and what this helped us figure out is that the narrative and the story we were building around the projects, they are actually continued during its construction and then after its construction, and then it was also modifying it itself through time. So this became a very important concept on how we build and construct the narratives of the project, but also understand them. Of course, a few people showed up at this at the exhibition. A lot of students, actually, a lot of scholars, a lot of professors, and it was really interesting to see how they interact with the material and how they created themselves their own stories and their own reading of what we had produced. A small catalog was put together for the exhibition. It was mostly a few images of the exhibition, but also writings from scholars, from PhD students, from professors from other universities as well. So all of this to say that it really helped us to understand what we were trying to do and what we have done in those past years. I think somehow in a very simplistic way, we synthesized that we took two important trajectories. One that we kept exploring the context of a project in a very imaginative way as a fiction or as a narrative construction. So we really, in order to nourish the project, we've built these very elaborate stories from the information we had gathered. And the other very important aspect of our work is trying to look at sustainability, designing the building envelope, but very, very integrated into that story and into the building, and not like parts that we add on to the project, but project being defined from the beginning by sustainability.
So one of the first competition that we did was the Montreal Planetarium competition. At that time, the office was maybe 4 years old. We were doing small work here and there, and that was actually our first big chance of looking at a larger building. And thanks to Mark, I guess you're right there. Actually, Mark was actually one of the first people who gave us a chance of working on a competition. Mark was actually on the jury. I just thought about that today. So it was a great experience for us just to be able to try to find different ways of looking at a specific site. We were asking ourselves questions about what do we do with the building, like shapes, envelope, and how do we approach a program. And that was actually our first chance to be able to compete with the big guys. All the big firms were actually there, and that's actually the first time that our name came up. Nobody knew who we were, and after that, that was a great experience for us. It brought a lot of press. The process was interesting. People got interested in what we're doing. So it was actually a very interesting time for us at the time in 2009. Looking at questions about transparency, envelope, how we would actually innovate in what we were doing. So we had the chance of doing it for this competition lasted maybe 3 or 4 months, and that's essentially all we had to do at that point. We weren't that busy, so it was actually the first chance to develop it.
I think one of the things that we've done when we were saying we were trying to build stories and fictions around the project, so we invited these we call them conceptual characters, people that we dreamed about or we tried to remember. And the interesting part, and I think we'll see later on, that those persons actually somehow became real into the projects that we do today. So we think about this Inuit from up north. We always thought he had the best vision of the sky. That was the best place to put a planetarium, but at the same time, its territory is in danger because of climate change, and so we had to address that. And then Nadia Comaneci, of course, was the star in Montreal at that time, and the mayor. So all these characters, they help us to invest the Olympic podium with something significant, because I don't know, many of you maybe know the Olympic podium, but it's been quite a white, empty, cold desert, almost a no man's land since the end of the Olympics. So reinvesting that space was important to us. We also brought glare and blindness as a critical metaphor, mostly to question why would we put a planetarium right in the middle of a city where the light pollution is at its highest. It's not the best place, but we also understand the importance of having this kind of institution. But so we were also interested in those concepts at the time. We were interested in a lot of things in searching for building the concepts of our project. One of the things that also interested us is that these mechanical pianos and the mechanical piano roll, you can actually buy a very nice one with the Symphony of Planets, and you put it in your mechanical piano. So from a machine, you generate music and poetry about space. So we use that paper to start defining the building envelope itself.
So in this one, that's one of the early diagram that we did of the planetarium. So what you see up above is the elevation. So that was our quest to try to understand the program and make the floor space as small as possible. So take the program, just model it, and vacuum the entire envelope, and just model the entire building on what the program really wanted to be, and be as efficient as possible in terms of usage of space. And what you see down below is those were elevation studies where we would take at that point the research on material like aluminum. We remember it was the Alcan planetarium or Tinto planetarium, so the use of aluminum was very important. So try to define how we would actually use this, the perforation, and try to work the envelope, the program, according to our understanding of what the podium wanted to let us do with it, but also what the sun orientation, and so we were getting into making the envelope as efficient as possible and responds to its place. So in every building we're trying to do is, hopefully it's impossible to dissociate them from their site first, and then the cultural identity in which we intervene, and also the social content. So all of these things were actually in the making at that point. So of course the Olympic podium felt like a white desert at that point, and we were just trying to build this new idea of architecture. Next one. Second project where we went elsewhere with our research of context. This is the Maison de la Littérature. That was the third competition that we won just after Sol Bello. This is, I'm still having goosebumps when I'm looking at this image. We were a young firm, and we started to demolish something that was actually very important inside this existing church. It used to be a theater that was actually embedded in a beautiful church. So you'll see one of the first things that we did is started to demolish what was not from the original content. So I really like this image because it kind of reveals the main idea of the context we'll talk about in a second. So the main idea there in our lecture or reading of the context, first of all, the building itself, the historical context. Beautiful church. They actually put new floors at some point into the 60s. They made a theater in this beautiful nef and beautiful space, and we thought, whoa, wow, that's awkward. What can we do with that? There was a problem with it from a programmatical point of view. There's an interesting story about that. Is the design brief was calling for only interior intervention into this building. So we designed, like everybody else, like the 4 other competitors, a building within the building. And after probably a month and a half after we just started, for us it didn't make any sense. Okay, why would you do that when we have this nice historical space and we're trying to put a library into something which is not quite done for that? So we read the brief, and at some point decided to do something completely different. We got scared to get disqualified for it. Actually, we won at the end. The client kind of liked this idea of doing something totally different. Competitors didn't like it. They thought that maybe we had cheated about the program, but our reading was quite interesting from a historical point of view, but also from a social point of view that Sergio will explain in a second. So the main idea here, took the program, put it elsewhere, outside, and make it a better program and a better building. So a few images here where we wanted to talk about contemporary architecture, very simple detail, nice material, but in conversation with the existing and beautiful stone building just beside it. So that's part of the annex just beside it.
I think one of our intuitions and early reactions to this project is why would you want to put literature inside a church when you know all the issues that liberals and literature had with the religion and the issues of censorship, and some books putting at the index. I'm not sure it's the proper term, but some books were taken away from the shelves. So if in our mind, if we wanted to create or to generate a space that is creative, that is open to the 21st century, the whole idea was, like Stephan explained, to put them side by side, and they can look at each other and they can interact, but not the literature inside the church. For us, it was a nonsense. The one thing that helped us, discuss and explain that intuition we had is we also had to design the permanent exhibition that had to be inside the building, and the permanent exhibition was about Quebec literature's freeing itself from religion. And when you look at early Quebec literature, it's really about the ground, the territory. It's about clearing the land and installing your family, trying to nourish your family. So we started to perceive that clearing the land is an action of freedom somehow. So it's very physical. You actually build your freedom. So we really worked around that theme in the project. So it all made sense together. Just a few more images of that permanent exhibition. So we came out with those inscriptions on the walls of the Maison de Littérature in relationship with the windows. We've designed that contemporary chandelier. Is also, we call it a cosmological chandelier because it was inspired by constellation and the sun and everything. So we really had this discourse of freedom that we've inserted inside the initial church. Few more images of the inside just to show, in comparison with that demolition image at the beginning, how things evolved. So one thing that we've learned, because we're trying to look at what we've learned from those early projects, is that we really need to develop an important critical reading of the program and of the context, and that's specifically that critical reading that allowed us to extract the program and give a new life, if we can say, or new definition to the institution itself, which is now very popular and visited by a lot of the younger generation and tourists. So I think for that reason it became a success.
And of course, the program is something we try to understand and maybe change if possible. So we're very criticized. We like to criticize and try to find out if it's really the right thing to do. So we've been kind of playing with this idea in every, I would say, most of the competition we're doing. This project actually followed Maison de Littérature. This is also a competition that we won. Dean Brown talked about this project, the Drummondville Public Library, which the reading of the context is totally different in this case. Drummondville is probably an hour and a half from Montreal, or Quebec City is probably halfway through, in between, suburban area. How do you approach building a new building in this kind of place? I mean, we were looking for roots. We were looking for clues to start thinking about designing a new library for the Drummondville. Next one. So this is the kind of sketches that we do. When we do our research. Those are diagrams that in this case, it was a diagram about the river, the electrical dam that is existing, but looking at many things to bring a different view or a different approach on how you would actually just design a building or just repeat the last library that you did, just change the envelope, change a few things, and that's okay. That's a library that we can actually move from place to place. We really wanted to try to find a place to embed the conceptual approach of this building into the Drummondville, which is, like I said, a suburban area. So in this case, that's the Saint-François River became very important. The rapids and the dam also became like anchors to our thought process. So you see the dam, the turbine, very interesting approach, and our reading of that was the river became very important in establishing the industrial era of Drummondville, and people with the dam, the electricity, started to come to Drummondville and became an industrial city, and we wanted to reflect that, at least partly, into our building. So this turbine who brought the economy, who brought the electricity, that brought prosperity, doesn't make any sense anymore with the electricity that we have in Quebec, which is really cheap and everything. But we interpreted that now the power and it's mostly the people getting the culture. So we kind of designed this big spiral stair where actually people can actually get access from many directions, and this kind of new power, it's not the water anymore, it's actually the intellectual or the intellect of people going to the library, getting information, and becoming better person as well. So we kind of brought this idea into the building very quickly. You saw the image at first. It's a stainless steel building with glass panels, and where'd that come from? The industry that was actually in Drummondville was mostly about the metallic or the metal that were actually produced, and we really liked the idea of playing with the colors and the material. And one material that we found was quite interesting is the blast furnace slag, which was a byproduct produced by that industry, and people were actually using it everywhere. But we liked the material, the color, the textures, and we tried to translate that into something that actually becomes a building later on.
I think we've kind of started to be attached with those conceptual characters, so we brought them again. We thought once again that they were significant because Drummondville was actually founded by a garrison of soldiers that called themselves the Voltigeurs, and by following the river, at one point they got stuck because of the rapids, so they just stayed there. And the war ended it, and they were not too much aware of what was going on, so they transformed themselves and they became farmers. So they started working the land, clearing the land again, feeding their families. So Drummondville is like many cities probably, but starts with an accident, the geographical accident. The interesting part we found in our more recent research is that those Voltigeurs, that's how those soldiers were called, now it's the name of the hockey team. And the city of Drummondville is very, very attached to its hockey team. So we even brought in the hockey card of of one of their famous hockey player inside our competition board. We were taking a risk there, but we thought. But we thought it was interesting that this soldier became a contemporary soldier, and also the whole relationship with ice and the ice rink, and the fact that in Drummondville there's plenty of them, many of them, became something important in the further development of the project.
And maybe I would add, in one of the diagram or research that we did, and that became key to winning this competition and even what the building is now, is we found out that Drummondville had the most ice rink per capita in Quebec. What a bizarre thing to find into your research. We're way far from urban context and everything, but it was a social thing that was important to people, and they could recognize themselves through the practice of that sport. And we say, okay, maybe there's something there that we can actually play and design a building, a library for them,
So what we also found out is that there was another ice rink planned not so far from the building we were asked to develop. So what we've decided quickly is to attach this ice rink to the library project and make one big project. And even from a sustainability point of view, we could exchange heat in between the two buildings. So all the good reasons were there to attach these two programs together. So that's what those images show. So once we've attached the rink to the library, we stick with that, and we further develop the project. We also generated a more free ice path in order for the ones that are not playing hockey just to be able to skate around and even interact with the library, coming into the gardens and getting out. So the whole research and Voltigeur becoming a hockey player informed directly the project.
And like the Maison de Littérature, we did something that was not in the design brief, and we went against the idea of the design brief, saying, okay, let's add something which is not part, but if you select us, it comes with the other project, which is the ice rink that we want to include to our project. So it was another way of looking at it.
So one image that we like a lot, it's that stair, very complex and looking for the word, sorry, but that very complex stair where you can actually come in and decided to change direction and get some very different perspectives of the library, build your own promenade through the library, which could be different every time. But beyond that, we also like this image because it concentrates a lot of things that we were trying to do. So the movement of the people through the library, the use of stainless steel, even the light, the design of the ceiling, the light is also perceived like an electric storm. So for all those reasons, we find this image became emblematic of what we were trying to do. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. Just a few more images of this library, and we really enjoyed today going there in the winter and see how the ice rink interacts with the library and how they function perfectly together.
And there's a story that goes with it. Sometimes architects, you go after a few years, you go back to your building, and then you wonder, and you're not the architect, but you're asking a few questions. And at some point, we asked a question to one of the librarians and said, "So, what do you like about your building?" Sometimes they respond, the light, the acoustic, all of that things. But one day, one of the librarians said, and that was a really good answer, and to us it made sense. And she said, "What I like the most about my library is people are coming here, kids, families, they're going and get books with their skates." And it's so she said, "I don't know who thought about that, but it's really working because it's always packed. On Sunday, even if it's nice outside, people are actually coming to the library because they're doing two things at the same time." And we said, okay, maybe that reading of the context was interesting at some point. So that's kind of so for us, this library is impossible to remove from that site and from its setting into the society.
So if I may add, that closed the first chapter of our presentation. The other ones are a little bit shorter. But all those projects, they were presented in the exhibition of 2018. And after that, we're moving on to projects that came after that.
In this one, we called it rescues because those are projects that we weren't planning to do. And for some reason, the private sector became interested in what we're doing, and we'll try to explain that in a second. Next one. We worked on a project called Pigeonhole. This is the last empty site in the old Montreal. So it's quite a very important site from an historical point of view, very important site for the city, for the Ministry of Culture, for patrimoine and everything. It's a very important piece of the Old Montreal. There was a few projects presented on that side before by other people, architects, but it was impossible to get the building permit. So at some point, we got approached because of our reading of the city, and maybe they thought that we would actually come up with something different. So I guess developers were getting anxious. So that's why we call that one rescue, because we got involved to bring a new light on an old site and maybe a different approach to be able to kind of deblock this process. So Pigeonhole, old building, it was a parkade, which I thought was pretty interesting at the time, with a car elevator. You know, it was very modern at the time that it got built. It got demolished, and that site was empty for many, many years. So we went back looking at the context, and we found a few great drawings like this one from François Delier de Casson, 1672, where the intent of that area was to produce areas with more greenery, with little parks and all these things. So we got involved and very interested in looking at what we could do with this building and try to bring something that was not in the previous scheme that were presented to City Hall. In this diagram, you can actually see the existing wall, the greenery spots inside. This is our site right here. So trying to find ways, in this case historical and contextual element, to produce a different kind of scheme that could actually be able to go further than the first step. A few sections here where we kind of started to implement a suspended garden. People there, it was an empty site, it became a park, an unofficial park, so people kind of like it, so we kind of decided to elevate this park and try to work around greenery as one first step to kind of develop this project. Old Montreal, for you that maybe went to Old Montreal, texture is very important. Layers of history as well. So very old stone, like artifacts, fragments, new construction, concrete, pieces of wood. But you know, there's something, like the grain of it was quite present. And we thought that this is something that was not present in previous schemes that were actually presented. So that became part of our approach, even from the design of the elevation or the texture of the building, that reading, the shadows, and the feeling that you get when you actually walk in on Old Montreal. So we're trying to kind of mix the greenery, maybe the texture, and that we could actually find in Montreal.
And if I may add as well, those images are taken from a photograph whose name is Guillaume Simoneau, and we're actually working with them. He's working on a book on the development of his project during its construction. So it's documenting its construction, but what we find interesting about that is the way he's documenting the construction is actually very similar to the way we've developed the project. So looking at texture, looking at shadows, using those shadows to define the building itself.
So in those studies, we were actually trying to take the grain and shadows and try to come to a common understanding of what the building elevation wanted to become. Of course, it's a developer project. Efficiency is key. Budget is also key. But you know, how do you play with all these things? So we started to map out some of the images that we found in Old Montreal, imprint this like we did a similar thing with Maison de la Littérature, the annex. It's an imprinted image of a house that you see in the material there, but try to find images or link to the history of Montreal, so when people like walk there, they can actually relate and find a piece of history, like a fragment that you can actually see, and hopefully people will actually read that and 20, 25 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years from now, that kind of reading of layers that we apply to the building. So this is something that you see here, the studies of windows and composition, and all those fragments became very important, and so we kind of redesigned a brief that we presented to the city of Montreal, and they kind of liked this idea of layering the information. Even if it was imperfect, it was one more layer that we're adding on top of the existing ones.
And we were trying to work the depth of the building envelope. But right now, when we went to Old Montreal, we started to switch towards concrete, prefabricated concrete, and we're trying to work it in a new and contemporary way, mix it with stone. So it's also in our practice is a shift toward a more mineral material.
So some of the images of the Pigeonhole project, and this is right now under construction.
I think maybe one of the other similar type of project that we had to work on in this very same situation where a developer comes to us has a little bit of a hard time to get his permit, you know, and then wants us to get involved as a design consultant. This time it was for a 200-meter, 60-story tower right at the entrance of Montreal. So it was a big task for us to find the right way of helping to develop that project.
Could you go back a second? Just to add, it was a good timing though, because we just lost this competition of this tower a few months before. So it was nice to be able to go back and design something just in front of this one. So just thought about that, yeah.
So just to say, it was a very, very small piece of land stuck in between an highway and a railroad, right at the base of the main train station in Montreal. So it was a difficult site, but the task we tried to better anchor this building to its context, to its site, to the city. So we tried to work on both levels. It's one of the tallest towers in Montreal. In Montreal we cannot build higher than the mountain, so we're exactly at the same height of the mountain. So it doesn't just address the neighborhood. It also communicate or in conversation with the whole city. So we went back to the important buildings like Place Ville-Marie, that cruciform building from IMP, the Olympic Stadium, the cross of the mountain. So we went very large in order to try to place that building properly on its ground. We also worked very hard to install the building in the Montreal skyline and to preserve the views from the mountain to the river. So we played with the geometry until we found that we clear a corridor so we can see the river from the mountains. So that was a very important argument in placing that tower in the skyline. We also found out during our research there's a little bit of an obsession with cruciform patterns. Place Ville-Marie, several churches, the cross on the mountain. So we kind of retained that motif and we tried to bring into how we design the building envelope and the prefab concrete panels that we were trying to use to create a very Montreal-inspired texture. Just a few sketches of that tower showing how we organized the three parts of it. So the basilaire in relationship to the ground, the highway, the train station, the tower itself, and then roof garden. The initial project didn't have a roof garden, which we didn't understand why. It's one of the highest towers of Montreal. It's in direct connection with the mountain, so it felt easy to propose that addition to the initial project. Few sketches of the building envelope, which actually transforms itself following the course of the sun. So it's a little bit more closed on the north, and as you turn around the building, it opens itself up and it closes itself again in order to be integrated to its exact position on the site. And an image of the basilaire, which is actually under construction, so we're following that a little bit, and that's where we are with that project and the I would say the private sector for now.
Back to our public work. This happened maybe a few months after getting the commission for the tower. So if we go back to the next one. This is a competition that we didn't win, but we found out that things evolved very, very quickly. The demands from the client evolved very quickly as well. So the question we were asking ourselves at first, looking at the programs and things like that, got more complicated. So with the Peter McGill library competition that was actually built within a tower, a new condo tower on the ground floor level. So a different kind of library, very urban at the same time. But the program and what they were asking for got very complicated to address. So the input, the context that we were looking for got duplicated. Many things got involved into this one. Just very quickly, like buzzword, like the program talk about the community, a creative hub, equity, diversity, inclusion. So at that point, we're kind of looking for stuff all over the place. And I think it's kind of our part to do that. The president of First Nation community as well for Montreal, I guess we're behind from what you're doing here out west with the Native community and the land recognitions and things like that. But it happened very quickly in a very short amount of time. And then you add other layers of things like the famous Gold League chart and all these things, and try to find different ways of assembling these buildings. So adding on top of that the co-design. How do you co-design a building during a competition? It's impossible. You're actually in your space, in your office, trying to find a way of creating a building that will be co-designed after you just won the competition. How do you do that? Those were very interesting questions. So how we approach it, maybe we do something more open, there's place for people that get involved after winning the competition. How do you approach the co-design after you win a competition? But in that brief, how many pages?
More than 1,000.
Like 1,000 pages of competition brief, here, design a building with this, and be sure that you find a solution for everything, of course. So it got a little bit more complicated, and as we go, and we feel that in architecture, it's becoming a little bit more like that as they go by.
I think that what we can say, and I think that connects with the second part of our proposition, is that we've also thought of the space of the project to be a clean slate or to be empty, and when we looked at that program built by the City of Montreal, took 7-10 years to build. It was suddenly very loaded with a lot of prerequisites. There was a lot of things in that context that didn't came from us, that we didn't invent, and it was a little bit destabilizing, in a way. So our way of reacting is, well, there's so many things to be done in collaboration with a lot of people that are not here because we're alone in our empty office during the pandemic. So, and trying to address this brief the best as we can. I think the solution that we found is we we came up with an art gallery, actually, more than a library. We said, we're going to give you a very open space, an art gallery with no exhibition in it, and it's going to be very flexible, and once we win, or we didn't, but we will continue build it together, and even this construction can move and evolve during the time. So what we thought is just giving them a very sophisticated ceiling with light, with flexibility, with acoustics, with bars to hang. So we really thought of it as an art gallery. So we invited that program to deconstruct or eliminate completely this what we call the third place library that we were used to work on for a few years now. So we worked very hard on a sophisticated ceiling, sometimes very reflective, sometimes interrupted by the grid of the building. So we've spent, I don't know, 90% of our energy on that. So at the end, what we proposed is a very empty plan with a few objects in them. And among those objects, we've proposed these big fountains. I don't know, like we've been inspired by Rome fountains, where we actually wash our hands in public as a post-pandemic gesture, where washing our hands is actually a social activity. We've proposed those glass, brass little houses for the children's. We proposed a surrealistic approach to a photomaton, which became a bookshelf showcase for musical instruments, but we kept the mirror and the curtain. So we just placed those objects into the space and we left everything else open. So basically what we were trying to do is just provide with a public space, a very mineral public space to continue develop and inhabit later on. So a few more images of those. You see that red carpet is actually red brick from that demolished hospital. That we had to demolish an hospital to put that tower there. So we thought of bringing it back to the project.
But a few words on the library we're designing right now. The Saskatoon Public Library. We're designing this project with Farmline Architecture in Vancouver, Alfred Waugh, a friend of us, and also Architecture 49 in Winnipeg. And this building, of this process, we were quite surprised to get this project. It's a true building or true approach towards a real reconciliation. And just the idea of putting a different team that talks about reconciliation in what we do and who we are. So two white guys from Quebec that speaks French and maybe make a few mistakes in English, and then you get this guy Alfred Waugh from Vancouver, which is a native architect. So just put these two teams together to work together towards creating a new kind of architecture was interesting. And then you take people from the prairies, from Winnipeg, that will actually oversee what we're doing and bring some information from the site and their understanding of the place was quite interesting. And I guess that's something that the client liked about the team that we were suggesting for this project. Maybe they have a different approach, maybe they have a way of discussing things between them, and this process was about a discussion, a relation in between people in trying to develop a different approach for such a important building for Saskatoon. So we started looking, of course, we didn't know much about Saskatoon or even the history of Saskatoon. So looking at the history of how the land was occupied over the years, so the fur trades and of course the collapse of the plain bison herds and the treaty making, and all these things became founding components of the thinking that we would actually put behind this project. So it's just not a big library, but once again we wanted to root this library into the site. Like Calgary's library is a great library. It's been done a different way. So how do you approach a library? Could you actually move this one and put it elsewhere? And this is always the question we're asking ourselves. We don't want that. It's not about international architecture. It's about places and community, and maybe people will actually like what they see, or if they don't like it, maybe they relate to it anyway. So anyway, it's try to establish this relationship between a community, a building, the architecture, and the society in a more general way. So of course, like we do at school, we started to look at maps and try to find clues on how we look at things. So those are like railroad maps. How do you get to Saskatoon at first? Why do you go to Saskatoon? Why do you create a city there? You know, the train and the water and the planes and everything. So we went through all of that, tried to understand why that was happening. But also the reading was our reading of white Western people or architects, and that reading was also done by the people who did those maps. You know, how you plan a city elsewhere in the middle of the plains. So we were very interested in finding out why there and why not. Those drawings were quite amazing, totally different from the first one. You know, as Western people, we draw straight lines. You know, like the provinces are like they follow parallels and things like that. You know, but you know the way the native people acknowledge their land is totally different. Okay, the approach, it's not as Cartesian as what we do or the way we think. So it was really two ways of thinking, and we were actually trying to understand that. So in this diagram here that we found is, those were the linguistic group division, and you see it's way more fluid. So the territory is totally different from the border between Saskatchewan and the next province, you know, or elsewhere in Canada or even in the States. So those were actually their provinces or their neighborhood. It was based on the linguistic of people. So we thought, wow, there's something there. How do you get that into your story? How do you get that into your building? And that become, of course, interesting with the linguistic. Shows how they would actually move from place to place. So it creates different pattern, different kind of ways of adapting themselves to the territory as well. And once you, of course, superimpose what we would do as Western people, like straight lines and things like that, you get two different models of this approach.
I think, like always, and like a lot of our projects, we like to interrogate the landscape, and as what we're trying to explain since the beginning is that we really clearly notice that this landscape is just not an empty ground. It's actually inhabited, and it's been inhabited for a long time.
And then more research and things like that, you know, you superimpose the history and how you get to Saskatoon and how you develop it, and then you get into diagrams like the first drawing of city of Saskatoon, the temperance colony. So people would get a piece of land, they would have to develop it, but it's very orthogonal, it's very organized, but it's totally different from the way the land was used before. So how do you put that into a building? How do you tell that story? How you can get people to relate to this little piece of land that we're lucky to develop in 2022-23. On this diagram here, the research brought us new information, and this is quite shocking, looking at the city and the grid and the temperance imprint on this beautiful landscape. We ended up finding out that they kind of forgot the greenery. Saskatoon has less green square meterage per capita than anywhere else in Canada, but they have probably one of the most beautiful land. So that became very important, how we approach the site. What do we do? How do we squeeze the building, try to make the building maybe as high as possible to create more land, to bring back some greenery and native plants and things like that. So that reading became very important to see how we're going to actually put this building on our piece of land that was actually allowed for this project. Talking about the process, we talked about we're looking for clues, like architects, we're architects looking for things like architects are doing it. In this case, the client got really, really keen on getting information from the community. Great process, amazing thing, and it's totally different from co-design. I'm asking you a question, and then you take my pen and you draw it for me. Maybe architects don't like that much, but in the way we're getting the information, now it got duplicated. It was just all over the place. It was not only 3, 4, 5 people in our office. We've got a full community bringing things to the table on that canvas that Sergio was talking about earlier today. So the engagement session were amazing. So we met with elders talking about very important issues. We met with social workers. We met with teenagers. We met with reconcile people about how we deal with disability, how we actually design a building and getting as much information as possible. So very different program from the one we saw before with the 1,000 pages program. In this case, a lot slimmer in terms of the information that we were getting, but the book was open to be designed, and we thought, wow, this is interesting. The building will learn from the people, okay? They will bring new information, and that will be our job as architect to work with that. So a totally different process, which to date we really like. Of course, COVID and distance and things like that, through Zoom, we got amazing sessions, getting information. As they were asking us questions, we were asking them questions. So many meetings that we had with the community, and I think this is the future of co-design. It's not about, okay, I want this, let's do it. Like they're very generous, and I guess this is our job as architect to bring this to life, and a totally different process anyway for us. Something that we were doing a long time ago by ourselves, but now it's way more interesting, we find. Just a quick drawing on the site. Very quickly, of course, native people don't like corners that much. It's the curves and all these things were brought to us. But they don't want to have a curved building. They want us to take advantage of what they have to say about that. There's the native people, there's the Métis people who actually have a different way of approaching their architecture. It's more like lumbers. It's more similar to what we do. And of course, there's people from Saskatchewan or from Saskatoon that have been there for a long time. So reconciliation, it's about every people. So those were the first sketches that we were planning to do. Innovation became something as well in terms of what kind of structure do we use, okay? So we use the idea of the Métis, how they would actually build a house using the lumber. So it's a 4-story CLT cross-laminated timber project with slab bands. So we're trying to innovate and bring the community to participate in this process as well. So it's not about the program only anymore, it's about how we build something that makes sense for this place at this specific time. The learning circle became something very interesting. The elders had a lot of very, very good comments, and the way we would actually put it together, where do we put it, and the set. So without them, we would have done something totally, totally different. The scale of the building, which is totally different from your library here, it's still a very large building, but you know the floor to ceiling height is totally different. It's very intimate. It's comfortable. People said that, you know, we want a big library, but we want it to be comfortable. So this is something that without that information, we would have done probably something different, like any larger public library in Canada. So we were taking that into the account, that we would actually use material and transparency, and you can actually see through that some of the language that we developed over the years, like transparency, the glass, the use of different kind of materials. So this is one of the image, the quality of light, how we would actually deal with children, you know. So we met with kids and their parents and the teenagers. So a very intimate design process. The plaza, also the link to the sustainability as well. So it's a green building, triple glazed. The way we interact with the very specific Saskatoon weather as well. So that got implemented with more research during the process.
So going into the last part of our presentation, so we go from one exhibition to the other, is the proposal that we prepared for the Venice Biennale. Just trying to synthesize that in a few slides was quite a difficult task, but so the title was Preoccupied Architecture Prerequisites. Like we've discussed, we started to understand that this white canvas and this empty land that we were trying to build fiction on was actually very loaded, very charged with very important prerequisites. So in order to address that question, we've built, all together with the help of Professor Choupin in Montreal, we've built a collaborative of different scholars, Dr. Auger from Athabasca University, Frederica from Carleton. So we've put it together a team similar to the one of Saskatoon, but in order to try to work together to design and to propose something interesting for that exhibition. I think what we came up to is that we really experienced in the past years a very important paradigm shift, and that was really forcing us to redefine and think once again about the role of the architect in the fabrication of contemporary architecture, which is obviously no longer just generated by very powerful computers, very powerful images, but it has a lot more to do with collaboration and discussion and listening. I think the sets of prerequisites that we've identified as being very important, obviously the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we cannot work without today. The sustainability, so the climate emergency, which is more than ever very important. The equity, diversity, inclusion is also a very important aspect. And also this whole, all these initiatives, the multiple consultation initiatives that are organized in a very different manners by public clients. So all of those prerequisites are now inhibiting the space of the project before we even get involved, and sometimes long before we get involved. So what we found, and we have to admit, when we looked at the Sanac Center brief and when we worked on Saskatoon, it's a little bit overwhelming. So I think the best that we thought we could do is actually listen and even learn or relearn to listen to all these voices that are present on the land in the project and that are already there when we start to work. So what we've done, and I think it was a very ambitious program, we've invited 10 universities across the country. So Dean Brown, I think you were part of the proposal. So we've asked these 10 universities to ask 10 important questions, so one question per university. So the one with the red came from here, from University of Calgary. So very important question about inclusiveness, about the place of Indigenous knowledge, about people with special needs. So all these very important consideration that come in the project today. What we did with those questions is we transformed them into posters with a small QR code in the back, in the lower part of the poster. And the whole idea was to be able to come into this global conversation that we were trying to organize, and to, have a lot of people participating in that global conversation about the prerequisites of this architecture. So scanning this code, you would have ended up on a website where you could actually add your voice to multiple voice. So the design of this platform was really really important, and all that information was to be collected. I guess the whole idea behind that is to collect information, to collect voices, and to listen to these voices. So that's why at the end, well, not necessarily at the end, but one very important product of that exhibition would be a library of voices, so a collection of ideas coming from roundtables, coming from discussions on sites that we would collect. Obviously, we had to propose something to put in the pavilion as well in Venice, but we tried to do something a little bit wider. So what we tried to do is have events happening in the 10 universities, have something happening in Venice, and also have invite people in exemplary architecture projects to join the conversation. So, for example, these posters we would put in, in a very simple manner in the lobbies. So we did some example at Carleton or University of Montreal. So you can go to school one Wednesday morning and just read the questions, get into the conversation. So we try to find a way to have these questions present, a little bit like almost overwhelming and present everywhere. We wanted to do that also in contemporary architecture projects. So we showed an example there at this Borden Park pool, which is a natural pool, so went very far in terms of sustainability. So we could imagine a family going to the pool on a Saturday morning and be faced with this difficult question and ending up entering the conversation. We did an example with the Pierrefonds Public Library that we work on as well. So looking back at our proposal, it was very, I think, very ambitious, very, very big. In Venice, what we propose to do is almost nothing, actually. Just indicating to the visitor that they have to go around the pavilion, face the questions. So we've put a lot of emphasis of those questions, like a little bit of a state of a crisis. You know, we're trying to load the brain of the person coming with a lot of interrogations and try to create a sense of emergency. So once having gone through the questions, he would enter the pavilion from the back, and inside the pavilion, what we were proposing to install is just a fragment of land with oral qualities, meaning that this piece of architecture was designed to interact with the sound of the voices displayed in the pavilion. So it's a non-finished object. It's a fragment. It's also composed of a glass floor. The whole idea of this glass floor is not in a position, but in relation to the glass ceiling that we often talk about and still trying to break. We felt that there's also a glass floor covering that ground, a very thin ice, a very fragile ice that we have to look at more closely. So ultimately, in that pavilion that we blurred to create some interiority, nothing was happening except hearing some voices and some sounds that came from that global conversation that we've organized. We made it pretty far in organizing this event. We didn't get the bid at the end, but I think we've learned a lot from that. And I think what we've learned and what we've kept is that in this curatorial committee that we were together in with our collaborative is that really sentence that we've put in red, is that listening is a creative ethic that we need to put together for the incoming years in order to make better projects.
And that goes back to what the first question we were asking ourselves when we started the firm is, what do we do? Are we listening? Are we looking for information? So gathering information from a very large context is something that we believe, and we think that it's making better architecture. It makes building that makes sense for people who use them in their community, and those buildings actually fits where they belong.
So those characters that we've dreamed of, and we invited them to our project and to build a fiction, they actually became real, and they're sitting at the table, and we're actually really talking with them and trying to develop the projects. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing lecture. I think we have a few minutes for questions. There are any?
Hello. Thank you. That was an amazing presentation, and I just had a question about something that you mentioned about the future of eco-design being community-centric or community-centric. I wanted to ask, how do you address recognizing the creative input of the community members into the overall design of the project?
I would say we're getting lots of information. Sometimes it's not something that we embed directly or at the, I would say, first level, but at some point it becomes something which is wider. It's a sense of place. It's a sense of, so some comments are actually embedded directly. Some are actually put aside for different reasons, but at the end it's a general idea of what the community wants. And I think, and I guess I'm talking for myself, with that kind of information, now the talent of the architect will make a big difference. You know, the way you interact with the information that you're getting, we might interact with that information a different way. And this is great to think that architects still have a place to take decisions and change cities and get involved. So it's not as direct, but it's with all the information that we're getting, at the end we're trying to find a best way of designing a good solid building for that community. Does it?
Any other questions?
I think it's a very interesting shift that you draw us through. Obviously, Stephan Chevalier are maybe Canada's two premier architects, and arguably they have a very legible set of preoccupations that become formalized in architecture. And then you make a statement like this that really challenges the authorship of the architect. And I think listening is very important. I think I acknowledge that, but the way in which we receive information as architects and then translate that into form, that translation becomes the preoccupation of the architect. And so what is the authorship of that translation? And how do you still retain the kind of authenticity of the voices heard through that translation process?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think we've left aside the authorship concept, and I think what we really want to keep is the leadership concept. I think by our education, by the way we work, by the fact that we're generalists, we feel that we have to remain somehow the leaders in order to put together all of this information, and I think authorship became a lot less important. I think the process and what it leads to is the most important part. I think our projects are showing similarities, but at the same time, and we truly believe that when we start a project, we have no idea how it's going to end, because we don't come in with, okay, we're going to do this glass wall, we're going to do this this black thing that we were trying to do. We really try to nourish ourselves from the conversation, and of course our own reflex or idiosyncrasy come back, but we're trying to equilibrate that in a different way.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting and super inspiring in a number of ways. A couple of comments. As a landscape architect, I've been working under this condition for most of my career, listening. So I do believe that as landscape architects, we've had to listen a lot more than your profession has. Mm-hmm. Also, that's just my comment. And then my next question, I guess, was about Saskatoon Library. Was how did you create a sense of belonging for First Nations people there? What was your biggest takeaways of creating sense of belonging?
By listening to them first, and try to bring them to the table, taking decision with us. They never draw a line, or they never said, okay, do this way. But they were giving us the information to play with. And at the end, when we were presenting them some of the idea, they were very happy that we were actually listening to them. And that's, I guess, the way we brought them to the table. They didn't try to play architect, but there's a relationship that got established between the design team and the community, in this case the elders and the native community, and they let us try to convince them. So they didn't come with fixed idea or it's been done like this before. They were very receptive to what we brought to the table as well. And at the end, it's just by presenting them the concept often, not at the end, say, this is our interpretation of what you said, but it's like we said previously, it's a conversation, like one pieces at a time, and build this idea, and not presenting something at the end, say, this is what we think you should have. It was more about the conversation, and it worked, and it's still working, and they're going to be part of this design process all the way along. And at the end, hopefully they recognize themselves through a process, which is probably as important as the building itself.
And so just to follow up, like, so I noticed in your notes there, I read your notes, that it's talked about including Indigenous or First Nations art into the building and into the spaces. Have you guys done that in some way yet, or is that sort of an add-on at the end of the architecture? Just
Right now, we're doing that right now. We're working with them, finding the best places to showcase. How do you do it? You know, it's once again, it's not first level, or you actually expose things. You don't take advantage of things as well. So it's actually in the process of happening right now. So once again, we'll see how it develops. But we're making room for that. We're making place for that, and even places for that to evolve in time, which is probably as important as well.
yeah, your work is amazing, and really, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, Sergio and Stephan, just amazing work. I particularly, I was coming expecting to think about the image, the object of architecture, and it transformed my thinking about your work to about process. I think that's really timely, and something that's a value to our architecture students and planning and landscape architecture students as well to incorporate. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. And you join me one more time in thanking them for their presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.